Hi all, moving on to the next part, which is on the immunization. Okay, I need to highlight that up to now in our exercises of duration and convexity, we have been applying them to approximate percentage of change to a single asset. Why would we want to do that? Calculating convexity and duration is not easier than simply just computing the new price and then deriving the percentage of change. Actually, the true value of the convexity and duration is when we want to evaluate the impact of the change of yield to a portfolio of asset, not to a single asset. So once it is applied to a portfolio, the concept is still the same. However, it can really ease the process of monitoring the impact of the change of yield to our whole portfolio. So to be able to do that, first we need to compute the duration and the convexity of a portfolio. To do that, it's very simple. We just need to find the weighted average of each measure. So weighted average of the Macaulay duration and the weighted average of the convexity, Macaulay convexity. And the weights is basically based on the present value of each assets. Okay, so now we know how to calculate the duration and convexity for a portfolio of asset and a portfolio of liability. I want to let you know that this portfolio duration and portfolio convexity will actually be used in the immunization strategy. Okay, so what is immunization? Immunization is a strategy for asset and liability management. It is a strategy to ensure that our net position, value of our asset minus value of our liability, is not significantly impacted by the movement of interest rate. Okay, so these are three main methods of immunization. First is exact matching, second is Reddington immunization, and third is full immunization. We will go through it now. So what is exact matching? Okay, exact matching is literally as what it is sound. Asset cash flow exactly match liability cash flow. For example, you have a liability to pay 1,000 at time 3, 1,000 at time 5, and 1,000 at time 10. You hold asset that will give you the same inflow in that same amount and in that same timing. So this is a strategy that is too hard to implement though, or it is almost impossible. In this situation, will interest rate movement impact the ability of the asset to meet the liability when due? No. Change of yield won't impact our position at all. This is because we will never need to liquidate our asset before original maturity. So all assets are held till maturity. If you remember, only when we trade our asset early that we evaluate the remaining cash flow as market value. If not, it will be evaluated on book value. So book value is not influenced by the current yield at all. What happened when cash flow of asset and liability don't match? Okay, there are two scenarios that will happen. One, our cash flow from our asset is less than the liability that is due. So we get our inflow is less than what we need to pay out. So what we need to do is we need to sell our asset or liquidate our asset, and the remaining revenue from the sale is going to be reinvested at the current yield. So the future cash flow of the asset that we just sold technically will be re-evaluated at the current yield. Another scenario is our cash flow is more than the immediate liability that is due. So the extra also need to be reinvested at the current yield. Okay, so what does that mean? So due to the expected liquidation to meet the liability due and cash flow mismatches, the value of asset will be evaluated based on the current yield. Hence, any change of yield will impact the net position of our company. So it will impact our asset minus our liability value. So what is most likely to happen to a company's net position next month when the yield is unchanged, the yield increase and the yield decrease? Okay, when the yield is unchanged, the net surplus or our asset minus our liability is unchanged, because the present value of our asset and the present value of our liability wouldn't change much, as it is going to be discounted with the same yield. For the second one, if interest increase, when interest increase, market value of asset and market value of liability both drop. So the impact on our net position will be dependent on our duration of asset compared to duration of liability. For if interest decrease also, value of asset and value of liability will actually increase instead of decrease. So the actual impact on the net position will be dependent on the comparison of our duration as well. Let me illustrate. We have the price over yield curve, right? And we have been seeing that the duration is actually the tangent line to the curve. So let's say the tangent line for the asset is higher than the tangent line for the liability. Sorry, I will do it in another color. So liability is red. Okay, so now duration asset bigger than duration liability. So what it means is, if I drop lower than I naught, our value of asset is more than liability, so our net position will improve. And here asset is lower than liability, our net position will deteriorate. And the other way around, if our tangent line is lower for the asset and higher for the liability, okay, so then it's the other way around. If it decrease, then bad. If it increase, then good. From here you can see that it's best if the duration of asset is equal to the duration of liability, because the tangent line for both will be the same. Hence, in any direction of change of I, the price of asset and liability will move in the same way, so the net position won't change. Okay, so basically it won't be affected by any change of yield. Okay, moving on to the next strategy, Reddington immunization. Okay, if you want to apply this immunization, there's 3 conditions that you need to meet for your portfolio of asset and portfolio of liability. First is present value of asset is equal to or bigger than present value of liability. Okay, some books require it to be the same. Some books say it doesn't have to be the same, as long as it's bigger than or equals to, it's okay. Because what we want is to meet our liability with our future liability with our asset. It doesn't have to exactly match. Okay, the second rule is the duration of asset is equal to duration of liability, and the third rule is the convexity of asset is more than convexity of liability. So what is these 3 rules is trying to achieve? Okay, I have some illustration for you. So this is the curve, the curve to represent price over yield that we used to see before. Okay, so now I have 2 curves. The green is representing the asset, and then the red is representing the liability. So it's a curve price over yield. So first condition is the present value at I naught is the same. Here I do it the same. So here the present value for both curve is the same. Second condition is the duration for asset is equal to the duration of liability. So this tangent line, both of these tangent line are the same. And then the third, basically the curvature. So the curvature of asset is bigger than the curvature of liability. So the asset curves a lot steeper. So from this you can see that by doing this, any movement of I increase or decrease from the I naught will improve the net position, because if you see here, if it move here, the price of asset will be higher than the price of liability, so our net position will improve. If it move in this direction, our net position will also improve. So these three conditions will ensure that in any movement, but it have to be a small movement. Any movement, then our net position won't be impacted very much. Full immunization. Full immunization is said to be more foolproof in the sense that it can protect the net position against any size of change of interest rate. For Reddington immunization, it is only going to protect the net position against a change of yield that is small enough. If it's too big, then it's not going to be. So how to achieve this full immunization? Okay, I think we start with the third condition. The third condition says that for any single liability that is due, there will be an asset on each side of that liability. Okay, and then for this set of two asset, one liability, you have to meet the other two conditions, which is present value of that asset equals to present value of the liability, and then duration of the asset is equals to duration of the liability. So these condition have to be met for all set of three. So we would say that this is a more tedious strategy compared to the Reddington immunization, because for Reddington immunization, you just need to see the duration for the asset for the whole portfolio in one calculation, and convexity also you have to do calculation for the whole portfolio. So full immunization is more tedious, but it's more foolproof as well. Okay, let's see an illustration of how this full immunization can be achieved. So here in this example, we can see there is one liability, and then before it comes one asset, and after it we have another asset. So and then I also make sure the first condition is achieved and the second condition is achieved for this set of three. So the first condition is present value of these two assets is equals to the present value of this liability. So the present value is at time 0. Then also the duration of asset is also equals to the duration of liability. Okay, I actually use gold seed to solve for the above. It doesn't matter how this is done. I just want to show that this is an example of how a fully immunized position will look like. But if you see, it is very just localized at this time. In other time, you have to redo this process again and again and again. Okay, done with the three types of immunization. If you see, the Reddington immunization is the most practical. Exact matching is too impossible. The full immunization is also very tedious and quite impossible. So the Reddington immunization is the most practical. Okay, a note on rebalancing. Here, I wish to say that when we achieved Reddington immunization and full immunization, in our asset liability management strategy, we cannot just sit back and relax. It needs to be redone regularly. Why? First, because new asset and liability are recorded in our portfolio. And then second, duration and convexity of asset and liability changes as time goes. Next slide, I will share some of the reason why this measures changes. And then the third is interest rate also have changed. And as we know, duration and convexity is dependent on interest rate because we have been using V quite a lot, right? So, yeah. Movement of duration. So, some reason why duration changes over time. One, we get closer to the cash flow. Second, the weightage changes, especially after we pass each single cash flow. And this impact is more prominent if the single cash flow that we pass have a big amount. And third, the yield changes. So as we said just now, when we calculate duration and convexity, we use a lot of V. So as V change, duration and convexity also change. Okay, so that's the end of this chapter. I will see you in the next one.